In 1974, an analyst at the CIA's Directorate of Science and Technology received a document from a small research lab in Menlo Park, California. The report described a series of experiments that shouldn't have been possible. It described ordinary people accurately describing buildings they had never entered, rooms they had never seen, objects hidden behind closed doors, in some cases hundreds of miles away. And they had done it again and again, under strict lab conditions, with scientists watching, with everything recorded. The CIA didn't know what to do with the report, but they couldn't just ignore it. Welcome to the Feedback Loop. I'm Naeem, and this is how the CIA tested remote viewing in the lab. By the early 1970s, U.S. intelligence had a problem they didn't know how to discuss openly. Reports were coming in from multiple sources suggesting that the Soviet Union was investing heavily, tens of millions of dollars, into what they called psychotronic research, the idea that trained human minds could perceive information about distant locations without any physical contact, without any known sensory channel. The Americans had a word for it: ESP, extrasensory perception. Officially, they didn't believe in it. The scientific consensus was clear. There was no credible mechanism and no reproducible evidence. But the Soviets weren't known for wasting money on things that didn't work, and US intelligence needed to know, was this real? And if it was, did the other side already have it? The answer to that question would eventually lead to a classified research program that ran for over 2 decades, but it started in the most unlikely of places, a physics lab in California. And it started with a question 2 scientists were afraid to ask out loud. Stanford Research Institute, SRI, in Menlo Park, California, was not a fringe institution. It was one of the most respected independent research organizations in the world. Government contracts, military contracts, all serious science. In 1972, 2 physicists there were quietly working on a hypothesis their colleagues would have found embarrassing. Dr. Harold Hal Puthoff was a laser physicist who had previously worked at the NSA. Dr. Russell Targ was also a laser physicist. He had developed laser systems for U.S. defense programs. Neither of them was a mystic. Neither was a believer in the paranormal in any conventional sense. But both were convinced of one thing: if psychic perception was real, and they were not certain that it was, it would be a physical process, something measurable, something that could be studied like any other phenomenon in nature. When they heard about a New York man named Ingo Swann and his extraordinary results at the American Society for Psychical Research, they invited him to SRI. What happened next changed their careers and eventually U.S. intelligence policy. Swann's performance at SRI on the magnetometer, a device buried under the floor of the lab, sealed inside a superconducting magnetic shield, was the moment that made them take this seriously. He appeared to influence its output simply by focusing his attention on it for 45 seconds. Scientists who witnessed it couldn't explain it. Puthoff and Targ decided to design a more rigorous test, one that would be harder to dismiss. The protocol they designed was called the Outbound Experiment. It was elegant in its simplicity. A team member, the outbound agent, would leave SRI lab and drive to a randomly selected location somewhere in the Bay Area. They'd been given sealed envelopes with target locations in advance, selected by a third party with no knowledge of the experiment. The viewer, sitting in the shielded room back at the lab, would then attempt to describe where the outbound agent was, what they saw, what they felt, and what the environment was like. No radio, no contact of any kind. The viewer had no information beyond the rough time window. Both the descriptions and the target locations were given to the independent judges who had no knowledge of which description matched to which target. The judges had to match them. If it was chance, the judges would match correctly roughly 1 in 6 times. That's what the math predicts, but the results they got were not that. Across multiple series of experiments, the judges matched viewers' descriptions to target locations at a rate that statisticians calculated was extremely unlikely to be chance. But the most striking test didn't involve a park in San Jose or a shopping mall in Palo Alto. It involved a secret Soviet nuclear facility and a viewer named Pat Price. Pat Price was a former police commissioner and businessman. He had no scientific background. He'd been referred to SRI after demonstrating what Puthoff described as remarkable natural ability. In 1974, the CIA asked Puthoff and Targ to run a test with a classified target. They gave Price a set of geographical coordinates, nothing else. The coordinates pointed to Semipalatinsk in what is now Kazakhstan, a Soviet nuclear weapons research facility. Price sat down, closed his eyes, and started describing what he perceived. He described a large complex of buildings, a series of cranes, a large spherical structure, a crane gantry, he thought, for lifting something enormous. He described rail lines running into the facility, guard towers. When CIA analysts compared his descriptions to classified satellite imagery of the site, they found the building he described, the crane, the spherical structure, the rail lines. They had never told him where that target was. The CIA expanded its funding immediately. In October 1974, Targ and Puthoff published their findings in one of the most prestigious scientific journals in the world, Nature. Not a fringe publication, not a paranormal newsletter. Nature, the journal that had published Watson and Crick's discovery of DNA structure. The paper was titled Information Transmission Under Conditions of Sensory Shielding. The editors had subjected it to peer review, with multiple reviewers. They had noted methodological concerns, as they should have, but concluded that the experiments were sufficiently rigorous and the results sufficiently unusual to warrant publication. The scientific community did not receive it warmly. Critics argued that the experiments had design flaws, that the controls weren't tight enough, that there were sensory leakage possibilities that hadn't been accounted for. These were legitimate criticisms. Targ and Puthoff took many of them seriously and tightened the protocols in subsequent experiments. But critics faced a problem of their own. They couldn't replicate the conditions to prove it didn't work either, and several independent researchers who attempted to replicate the experiments got results that they couldn't explain away. The scientific debate never fully resolved. It still hasn't, but the CIA had already made their decision. By 1978, what had started as a small research contract at SRI had grown into something larger. A classified unit of military remote viewers was established at Fort Meade, Maryland. The program would go through several names over the years: Gondola Wish, Grill Flame, Center Lane, Sunstreak, and finally, Stargate. It would run for 22 years, and it would involve dozens of military and intelligence personnel. It would produce some of the most extraordinary documented intelligence sessions in American history, including one involving a Soviet submarine that didn't exist yet. But that's next week's story. Here's what I want you to take from this. You don't have to believe remote viewing is real to find this story significant. What you have here is this: two credentialed physicists at a respected institution running controlled experiments under peer-reviewed protocols and publishing results in Nature that they couldn't explain. The CIA, an organization not known for funding things out of curiosity, committed over $20 million and 2 decades to a program based on those results. That's not proof of anything supernatural, but it's not nothing either. The question that Puthoff and Targ were really asking underneath all the lab protocols and statistical analyses was a question about the nature of perception itself. Is the mind limited to what the body senses can reach, or is there something else going on? That question is still open. In this noisy, rushing world, your intuition is still whispering. Premonitions, precognitive dreams, subtle signals just beneath the surface. This skill was developed in secret government programs, and now it's yours. Sit with paper and pen, receive a blind target, and let pure intuition flow. Only after you finish is the target revealed. The Feedback Loop Remote Viewing Starter Kit, an 8-lesson video course teaching you how to remote view from scratch, with structured lessons, printable session sheets, and blind validation targets. Use the discount code in the description below to get 10% off and start developing your non-local awareness today. Hal Puthoff went on to become one of the most cited researchers in the field of advanced physics and consciousness studies. Russell Targ continued remote viewing research for decades after the SR program ended. He co-authored multiple books and gave a TED Talk on remote viewing in ESP. TED removed it from their platform. The SRI program files were declassified by the CIA in 1995. The documents are real. The session transcripts are real. The statistical analysis are real. Make of that what you will.